I went to Argentina years ago because I wanted to see, I'd heard about the revival that they had been in for 20 years. And I was so hungry. We were beginning a real outpouring here. And I just wanted to see what it was like. And so I met up with Randy Clark and went to Argentina. And then we went into Brazil. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful to see what was going on there. But this is the impact. I would go into these meetings and I'd close my eyes so I wasn't distracted by anything. I actually could discern or to judge in a correct way the nature of what was happening in the room because I could sense his presence and what he was doing. And I went there just to examine. I went there to approve, to see, is what's going on here, is it consistent or similar to what's going on there? And I came back with this understanding, with this illustration. You can go down here to an apple orchard and you can pick an apple off a tree that's fully ripe and ready to eat, and it's perfect, it's delicious, everything about it's wonderful. And you can go to another tree that actually grows apples for a later date, a later harvest, and you can get an apple that's about this big. And it would be, what many people have done with revival is they point to the small apple and they say, well, you're not an apple. And it's 100% apple, just as the big one is. It's just not as mature. And by not celebrating what God has given you, you have proven yourself unworthy of increase. And so the very people that are crying out for revival have canceled their opportunity for it because they didn't celebrate what God had done and had given them. It's a huge deal. So I went to see that when I could sense, all right, they're way farther down the road than we are, but I could sense it. It's the same thing. I was so encouraged. Some years later, I got to do a couple conferences with Carlos Anacondia, and he's, my goodness, he's got to be one of the most wonderful and scary persons alive. He is. He doesn't speak English, so I sit here at the table with him through an interpreter, translator, and man, come to think of it, he laid hands on me but killed me. It was good. It killed me in a good sense. Sat down at the table with him. I was just telling him what was going on here. And this was his remark. This is his conclusion. He said, this is revival. And then he said, not everyone agrees with me, but this is revival. Here's a guy who in these stadiums, he'll just get mad at the devil and rebuke him. And people that are riding in buses down the street next to the stadium, they start manifesting demons because he rebuked demons. And they've learned, they have people positioned outside the stadiums on the road. So the taxi drivers and the bus drivers, they all know what to do. Somebody starts flopping around, they bring the bus over. There's a team. Is that bizarre or what? There's a team there to get them out of the bus, get them all delivered, set free, and send them on their way. It's like, this is awesome. You don't even have to come to the meeting, just drive by. What was the name of his book? Was it something like, Listen to Me, Satan? This guy's got an attitude. It's a great book, too. Acts chapter 2, verse 1, when the day of Pentecost had fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. There appeared to them divided tongues as of fire. One sat upon each of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Notice they heard wind and they saw fire. Sometimes what you hear is different than what you see, even though it's the same thing. The same thing will manifest in different ways to the way you perceive things. It will shift. It's still all the same move of the Spirit. They were filled with the Spirit, spoke in other languages, spoke in tongues. There were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. When the sound occurred, the multitude came together and were confused. I want you to hear the fruit of revival. They were confused because everyone heard them speak in their own language, and they were amazed and marveled. Verse 12, they were amazed and perplexed. Verse 13, others mocking. So that's the fruit of revival right there. When this sound occurred, verse 6, a multitude came together. This is what I want you to catch. When a sound occurred, what was the sound? It was wind that appeared like fire. Psalms 104, it's quoted in Hebrews chapter 1, referring to angels, says, of the angels. And of the angels, he said, they are winds and they are fire. What is the house of God? Gate of heaven. What happened after 10 days of prayer, 120 people crying out to God for the breakthrough he had promised? What happened? A roar from heaven came, a sound that shook the place. This wind comes in, this violent wind, if you will, with manifestations of fire. I believe, this is my personal conviction, is what happened is that there was a release of an angelic host to bring a heavenly encounter and experience to people. That the air became so pregnant with faith with what God was going to do that there was a roar from heaven. Now it says that when the sound occurred, the city came together. The sound was not people praying in tongues. This is an international city. You're not going to have people speaking in other languages of the mighty deeds of God, verse 11. You're not going to have people speaking in other languages and grow crowds of thousands just because they hear them speaking in a foreign language. The sound is the sound of heaven. There was a roar that came out of heaven that completely dismantled the illogical antichrist thought patterns that existed hovering over this city that had just crucified Jesus some weeks earlier. This people that had crucified Jesus, they're sitting there, they're in their homes, 9 o'clock in the morning, playing with their kids, working in the yard, doing whatever they're doing, and this sound occurs, and something causes a city of thousands to drop their tools and everything they're doing and just to follow the sound. There's something, an intangible, that is beckoning them. Something that was it's more than a sound that tickled the ears. It's more than a curiosity. It's a sound that pierced and penetrated the heart and called them into a destiny. It was a sound of the breath of God across yielded hearts of 120 people that finally got their act together after 10 days of praying together. They were in one accord. The group of people that competed and were jealous and were boasting and them being greater than the other have prayed together for 10 days. They've got their issues worked out. They don't know what God's about to do, and suddenly God invades into that atmosphere, and there is a dismantling of the prince of power of the air that influenced the thought life of a city. People drop all their stuff, and they just find themselves walking not mindlessly, but with purpose and destiny, walking into an environment where they see something they do not understand. And that's 120 people under the influence of the Spirit of God. And Peter stands and he begins to preach to them, and their cry is, what must we do to be saved? Let me put my own words in here. Weeks ago, we killed the man you're talking about. Now we want to know him. How does that happen? This sound. It was the sound of the breath of God across yielded hearts. What is that like? It's like the saxophone. I love a good saxophone. Saxophone players that reed in that instrument, and a skillful musician can breathe across that reed and produce such a wonderful sound. Picture this: yielded hearts, not hearts with individual agendas. Yielded hearts, and have the breath of God blow across those surrendered hearts. Creates a harmonious sound that summoned a city to its destiny. Summoned a city from the absolute worst place a city could be. We are the ones that crucified the Christ, to the city of the great, great outpouring. How did it happen? Only it took 120 people. 120 people yielded to the purposes of God. God breathes into that place. A sound is released into the city that draws thousands of people to come to hear a simple message of the gospel and to cry out for their own forgiveness.